Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is a children's book author, having written the books The Goldilocks Quartet and The Odd Dog. Her name is Leia Barrett, and my interview with Leia will follow the note-taking sounds. Leia Barrett, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
You worked in the nonprofit sector as an education director for a symphony, as well as a marketing director and a COVID executive director. I'm guessing that one was during the COVID lockdowns, and this was all before you became an author. What was your work in the nonprofit sector like?
Well, I worked in the performing arts sector, and so my first job as a director of education was coordinating and creating educational programs for families, children, teachers, etc. I served roughly 65,000 people annually with my programming, and I chose to leave Orlando in 2018 to be closer to family. At which point I joined a nonprofit chamber music presenting organization where I was a marketer for about a year before, actually less than a year before everything was shut down during COVID. And I helped us transition to an all online presence, at which point, about 6 months into that, our executive director, the founder, stepped away, and I was asked to take over that role, which I did for about 2.5 years, basically navigating the organization through presenting again under strictures, under COVID strictures, and then once we had kind of gotten past that, I had really wanted to transition full-time to being an author.
You've written 2 children's books. The first of them is titled The Goldilocks Quartet. Without spoiling too much about the Goldilocks Quartet, what is that book about?
Well, I created the original iteration of that story when I was a director of education. I had created a series called the Symphony Storytime series that was live chamber music for young families. I felt like there was a distinctive lack of pieces created specifically for that demographic in classical music that were recent and more relevant to young families. And so I was asked to create some programming myself and thought about some of the fairy tales that I knew that I thought could lend themselves well to music. And I felt that Goldilocks, with its themes of threes, so to speak, could be suited very well. And particularly, I wanted to have each character be represented by an instrument. And Goldilocks and the Three Bears is one that was only 4 characters total. So this was really kind of a trip down Goldilocks with a musical twist. And I also wanted the story to change a little bit based on how the inclusion of music affects us, and how, for me, really, music brings us closer together. So I guess that's kind of a little bit of a teaser. It definitely ends differently.
Your second children's book is titled The Odd Dog. Without spoiling too much about The Odd Dog, what is that book about?
So The Odd Dog is the story of a quirky stray who is learning to live with a family for the first time. And I wanted to create a story that was from the dog's perspective, really just kind of experiencing the world in terms of first being out on their own and kind of learning how to get along on their own, and then being in a family doing the same things they did when they were on their own, but finding that the family didn't really have the reaction that they were hoping for. And so it's really a story about helping our dogs feel comfortable. One of the things that I like to say about this book that maybe is a little bit of a spoiler, but not really, is that Odd, unlike many main characters in children's stories, doesn't learn anything. Behind the scenes, the parents don't actually speak. Actually employed a kind of Charlie Brown mechanism where you only see their shoulders down. But you see the parents learning how to build a rapport with Odd the dog and finding ways to help Odd feel comfortable and feel like they belong. So it's really a story about acceptance and giving dogs the time and space they need to feel welcome in your home.
How are you planning on using the odd dog to fundraise for organizations that deal with rescue dogs? Because I understand that you're either doing that or planning on doing that.
I actually have started doing that. I do it in a variety of ways, coming from a nonprofit background. Right now, I host quite a few book signing fundraisers where I will find a mutually agreed upon location with the rescuer shelter. Um, and we will be present at a public location where people can buy the book, and I donate 25% of proceeds from that book signing to the rescue. It's a great way to also raise awareness of the rescue. What we find is not only do they benefit from the fundraising that I'm able to do, but also they can usually ask for donations themselves. They can tell people about their services. They can potentially get new volunteers and advocates for their mission. And I've started doing that around Kansas City, but beginning this fall, I am working to expand that outwards. Another thing that I do is I will seek out partner rescues and shelters, and if, for example, they are doing a fundraiser, I will donate auction baskets that are typically a slightly higher value, around 75 to $100, that also have a component that I call um, the experience piece, where, for example, I have a new book that I'm working on right now, and in addition to physical items, the winner of an auction basket will get their dog drawn in the book as an extra character. And what I find is offering small incentives like that are wholly unique and difficult to get themselves, typically bring in 3 to 4 times what I am offering. So even though I'm one person with pretty limited resources, I do these kind of things initially pretty, through these grassroots efforts, I'm able to raise several $1,000s a year. I'm continuing to grow my following because my hope is that I am donating at least 5 figures a year in the next 3 to 5 years.
Regarding the Goldilocks Quartet in particular, did your work as an education director for a symphony help you with writing children's books? And if so, how?
That's a wonderful question. It was definitely a little bit of trial and error, but I do feel that the relationships I built with teachers through being a director of education has really helped my book writing. Teachers are definitely a target audience for me, and so I always seek their feedback. I always ask them to do beta readings for me, and I have a group of probably at least 25 to 30 teachers that I can consistently count on, and I have probably 50 to 60 who, if they can't help right now, I can usually count on them to help at a later point, and I can draw on their experiences, particularly in terms of writing books that are age appropriate and that they can see as something that they can use in their classrooms.
Regarding the illustration of both books, you used different illustrators for the Goldilocks Quartet and the Odd Dog. Candace Neal illustrated the Goldilocks Quartet, and Shannon McKeon illustrated the Odd Dog. What was it like to work with Candace and Shannon on children's book projects, and do the two illustrators have different illustration styles?
The last part first, they both have very different illustration styles, though I would say a definite connection between the two is they have very whimsical styles. Um, I uh, I knew Candace personally from my first book, which is a pretty common thing for new authors if you independently publish. Candace and I had been working together at the Orlando Philharmonic. She herself is a highly talented artist. She's an actor, um, illustrator, singer, you name it, and she has probably done it. She is someone who, her and her husband both, I connected with during my time at the Orlando Philharmonic because they were narrators for several of my education programs. And interestingly enough, necessity was how I learned she was an illustrator. I had hired an illustrator for a symphony storytime program who was unreliable, and I was talking to them about it because her and her husband were deeply connected in the artistic community. And I said, man, do you know a good illustrator who has kid-friendly illustrations? And her husband gave me a look, and then he took out an iPad and he started showing me Candace's illustrations. And they were so sweet and charming. And at this time, she really was not doing a lot with her visual art, but I fell in love with her illustrations right away. And so we used her for Goldilocks that year. And we liked her illustrations so well that we started using her more often. And even when I had left the Orlando Philharmonic, she continued and continues today to do illustrations for them. She also writes scripts for the young people's concerts. Even though she is no longer affiliated with the Orlando Philharmonic, other than contract work, her work has become so beloved in that community that she works with them regularly. And so we had done illustrations for Goldilocks, and when I finally, during COVID, decided I wanted to actually publish a physical copy of it, she was the first person I thought of. We worked together to kind of expand the story, to really create, um, basically have illustrations that spoke a little more towards the story. Um, when you do a live presentation, illustrations are a little bit different. They have to stay up on the screen longer. They maybe have to be a little bit more static. They can't necessarily be as complex. And so the primary characters were largely there. We just kind of did a little bit of tweaking. There was a pretty large hiatus between my Goldilocks Quartet and the Odd Dog. And when I finally decided to do the Odd Dog, I had connected with my art designer and publishing consultant, Melinda Martin, through an Indie Author Summit. And uh, Candace at that point, her life had taken her in a very different direction where she had less free time. She was running her she was helping her father run his graphic design business and just did not really have the capacity to illustrate a book for me at that point. And so Melinda had several authors that she worked with regularly, or excuse me, several illustrators that she worked with regularly. And I described to her my vision for the book. I had several parameters. I wanted something that felt very sentimental. I wanted to have a dog character, since I knew it would be a rescue, that really spoke to people who rescue dogs with no um, regard to breed. I wanted mutts, basically. I wanted Odd Dog to be a mutt. And I really wanted to have more of a watercolor kind of sentimental style. And so she said, well, I have just the person in mind. Shannon McKeon is a very young illustrator. She's in her 20s. She has a young family. And she had been doing some contract work where her name was not on some of the illustrations she had done. So she was really looking to kind of put her name out there. She's a relatively unknown illustrator who since then has been working on several books. She was compared to Roald Dahl's illustrator for one Kirkus review. So she's really starting to get the reputation that she richly deserves. And what's interesting about the Odd Dog compared to some of the other work she does is she has a very whimsical, realistic style, and she was able, amazingly, to just pivot to a more quirky, kind of mixed style. If you see the book, the dogs are recognizable, but they have stick legs. They look like dogs. They have funny expressions. In Kirkus, it was described as anthropomorphized. In many ways, it is, but it still holds that very whimsical style. And so, very different styles, but artists who have a similar approach, who really think kid forward and want to create things that are a joy to look at.
Both of your children's books are independently published. What was it like for you to independently publish a pair of children's books?
Well, that's really a personal choice. I I've never really thought about traditionally publishing a book because I have a PhD in fine arts. I come from the performing arts sector, and I've always liked to have a more active role in the full artistic product. I also am not a writer by training, and so I am maybe not as consistent in terms of writing as some other people might be. I think that the traditional publishing schedule where you're publishing 4 to 5 books a year would be difficult for me. This gives me a little bit more of a comfortable schedule to build out other aspects of my business, such as merchandising. There are definitely times when self-publishing is difficult, especially if you have personal things come up that make it where you maybe can't focus on your book for a week or two. But overall, it is difficult, and there's a lot to remember. Your books kind of live or die based on how much effort you're able to put into them. But I did feel that my unique qualifications made me able to manage those aspects since I've had a hand in at least initially all of the aspects of self-publishing a book in terms of marketing, in terms of administration, having the discernment to recognize whether a book is strong or not. But when it all comes down to it, even if you're self-publishing, you still really should have a team if you want to be serious about it. I mentioned previously Melinda Martin, who is a book designer and publishing consultant. She was someone who really helped put a lot more polish onto my second book, helped me avoid a lot of mistakes. People think that it's just you, but really you have you have editors, you have illustrators, you have beta readers. As I highly recommend an art designer, book designer, publishing consultant like Melinda. These people are basically the check and balance that help you create the best possible book you can. And really, it's a little bit like taking a self-guided course. It's the onus is on you to really learn, um, to really learn what you need to do. And a lot of times you're learning from other authors. I feel like indie publishing has really grown in the past 5 to 10 years as access to more global printing options, etc., has grown. I knowing which knowing which reviews are important, knowing awards that are important, being able to navigate what you need to not only legitimize yourself with your readers, but also with the larger community of gatekeepers, such as distributors and uh, teachers, librarians, people who know the difference between a book that was amateur versus a professionally done book is something that you just kind of learn with time. Every author, independent author I know who is successful, often jokes that their first book is largely their learning book. And you don't necessarily see those books being actively advertised as much by these authors. A lot of times you learn what you need to in terms of publishing and marketing, and you regroup and do a better job the next time. And the other thing I would say is the biggest, I think the goal you want to meet with an independently published book, I think the bar that you should set is that it should be indistinguishable from a traditionally published book. And I have been told multiple times that I have achieved that with the odd dog, and I think that the only way you really do that is if you find a team who is willing to objectively help you get a book to the highest level possible.
One final question, and this is about a page on your website where people can buy not just both of your books, but they can also buy classroom guides for your books, t-shirts, stickers, and other items that are themed around your books. How are the classroom guides, t-shirts, and stickers produced?
It definitely depends on the product. For example, stickers, I just came out with a line of enamel pins. Those I do print myself, and I print them in bulk through various websites that have been recommended by other vendors. Some things I do still print on demand, like a t-shirt. I Until I would have a brick and mortar, I don't see printing t-shirts in bulk because sizes depend so much. And I don't have an issue with doing print on demand as you're testing. Like if I had, for example, a t-shirt design that sold 100 that made 100 sales or so, I might tell myself, well, maybe it's time to do a small run of commercially produced shirts. There's always that question of quality when you're deciding what merchandise to produce, and I will often I will often decide the necessity through smaller crowdfunding campaigns where I might not set a goal that is enough to produce the product, such as my enamel pins, but I will road test designs to see what is going to be popular with my constituency. And for example, if I set a goal of $1,500 and I don't meet it because there is simply not enough interest and I can't drum up enough interest, then that might be a project that I'll either abandon or find a smaller way to produce. But I do, since I've transitioned to being fully self-employed and building my business, I do a lot of in-person vendor events, and those really um, help me dictate demand and help me identify what products are worth producing in offset printing. Like I always offset print my books because I feel like the quality of print-on-demand books is not consistent enough for the purposes of my brand, where print on demand t-shirts are good enough quality that I feel comfortable selling them. And I'm always trying to think of new products and gathering feedback from people I meet in person. I might tease out a new product to see how how interested they are. And this is also something that I would just add in closing. I think it's really important when you're deciding on new products to really have a clear audience in mind and find the people who are not just extreme versions of that audience, but are also middle ground. Like, there are people I know who share every single Facebook post I have. It's great to ask their feedback on a product, but they're probably, and I kind of notice they're always going to say, oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. And because they want to support me and they want to support the brand, they will probably buy it. Where someone who is, who likes what I do, but is not necessary for reasons like maybe they don't have a huge budget or they have young children or something along those lines, they can be a really revealing audience for whether a product is going to do well because they're going to be a larger market share than my really dedicated audiences. So that I hope that kind of answers that question a bit.
Leia, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing guest to interview.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It was just wonderful to be on the show, and I really appreciate your time, and I hope this was helpful.
Children's books are the first books people read in their lives, and it was amazing to interview Leia about her work as a children's book author. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2025, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.